Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Vinitaly International Wine and Spirits Exhibition. The 54th edition of Vinitaly will be held from the 10th to the 13th of April, right here in Verona. To discover more about Vinitaly and get your tickets, visit vinitaly.com. This year, the Italian Wine Podcast will be live and in person in Pavilion 6, Stand A7. So come on down and say hello.
Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Listen in as we journey to some of Italy's most beautiful places in the company of those who know them best, the families who grow grapes and make fabulous wines. Through their stories, we will learn not just about their wines, but also about their ways of life, the local and regional foods and specialities that pair naturally with their wines, and the most beautiful places to visit. We have a wonderful journey of discovery ahead of us, and I hope you will join me. Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Today, I'm meeting up with my guest, Fiona Beckett, who's in London at the moment. Food, wine writer, author of numerous highly acclaimed books, and one of the world's leading experts on matching wine and food. Fiona has created possibly the most comprehensive and best website on this complex subject, www.matchingfoodandwine.com. We're close friends, so I'm delighted to meet up with you again here, Fee. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, the sun is shining in London, so...
Now, Fee, you are the Guardian wine writer. You contribute regularly to Decanter and other publications, and you're the author of at least 25 books on wine, food, beer, and even non-alcoholic drinks. Some of your many titles include Wine Lover's Kitchen, How to Match Food and Wine, Eating and Drinking, and A to Z of Great Food and Drink Combinations, as well as food books such as Fiona Beckett's Cheese Course, The Frugal Cook, and The Ultimate Student Cookbook, which, as you know, it's a book I know and love well for various reasons. And you even have your own podcast with Liam Stevenson, MW, called Batonnage, which explores this complex subject of matching wine and food. You judge in wine competitions and food awards. I saw last week or so, you were up north judging marmalades. So you're incredibly busy. How do you manage to do it all?
Well, I mean, that is stretching over a number of years, not all at the same time. But the marmalade judging was super fun. I've never judged marmalade before, and I learned so much. I mean, I thought I was a pretty good marmalade maker, and, that my marmalade recipe was, just as good as it got. But actually, I've learned masses about different marmalades.
You look like you were tasting loads and loads of marmalades. I loved your marmalade-coloured coat as well.
I know, I picked that up from a charity shop.
Wow, what a find.
Yeah, it was a really good find.
Great. Well, Fee, let's talk about matching food and wine. A lot of people think that there's a huge mystery surrounding this complicated subject. Is there?
There shouldn't be. And it's the last thing I would ever want is for people to think, oh, this is something else I have to learn about wine, and wine's complicated enough already. I think it makes the whole subject of wine easier and more accessible. And I think the advice I sometimes give is, put your cook's hat on. Think when you're in the kitchen, you're cooking, you often think, oh, that would be nice with that, or that needs a squeeze of lemon, or a bit of pepper on that. And what you're trying to do with wine is just make it work with the dish, just like that. And there's no one final answer, just as there is no final one recipe. You just experiment and try things.
Sure. Actually, that's very interesting coming at that from a cook's point of view. Are there some basic important principles that you can give to our listeners that would be a useful guide?
I would say the most useful thing is don't think solely about the basic ingredient. Think about the way it's cooked. For example, let's take chicken. How many ways are there of cooking chicken? I mean, just an enormous number. Roast chicken on the one hand, something like coq au vin on another, a Thai green chicken curry. All of those need different wines. And so think, is it Are we talking about something that's lightly cooked or raw? Are we talking about something that's heavily charred? What is, if any, is the sauce on it? What is it served with? What kind of food tradition does it come from? Which is where Italian food might come in. So, put it in context.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice. People sort of think fish, white wine, but as you say, it all depends on how the fish is cooked. I'm thinking of a rare tuna steak grilled in Sicily, perhaps with tomatoes and capers and lots of garlic, and that could stand up well to a nice Sicilian red.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I was just thinking as you were talking there. I was thinking frappato might be rather nice with that.
Yeah, certainly. Well, let's since we are on the Italian Wine podcast, let's think about Italian wine and food. I think the Italians probably make much less of a fuss about this than we do. And normally in Italy, the wines that accompany the local foods are precisely the wines that are made in that same locality. And it usually works pretty well. Wouldn't you agree?
Totally. I mean, it's just, it's like breathing, isn't it? It's just like that is the wine you drink because that is the wine you make. And I also think Italians have a much plainer taste register than perhaps we do. Most Italians, I find, love Italian food, and they might be occasionally persuaded to eat something else. I'm more than happy with it. And Italian food is not heavily spiced, is it? It's often quite simple, relying on great ingredients. And the wines are relatively modest in alcohol for the most part, certainly the more traditional styles, and they're dry. And so they just go really easily and seamlessly with the food.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. And also I think you're right that our palates are really shaped by this vast, just as we have a huge range and choice of wines from all over the world, so we have that choice with all of the different cuisines of the world that we enjoy in our lives at various times. Whereas Italians, as you say, they tend to enjoy Italian food and Italian wine, but even going much more specifically than that, their own regional foods and wines, and even more specifically than that. I'm thinking about some of the differences in the foods and wines from somewhere as close as Alba and Asti, and how the Barbera d'Alba can vary from Barbera d'Asti is almost a completely different drink that goes more closely with the foods from that nearby locality. So we're really talking about a pretty precise local tastes and flavors that people don't like to stray too far from as a general rule.
I think so. I mean, I can remember being in Tuscany on a Chianti trip, and the meal would certainly in the past have started with red wine as well as finished with red wine. And so you'd get a red wine, a light Chianti, served with something like a chickpea and rosemary soup. Whereas, we might think, oh, well, white wine would be better with that. And I mean, there are more white wines there now, but, it's certainly, red wine, sort of still kicks off the meal. And, we wouldn't think that way.
That's true. And actually, another interesting point, I think, is that we'll often have a glass of wine, maybe not even with anything to eat, as an evening is kicking off, whatever time of day. But in Italy, it's very rare for a glass of wine or a bottle of wine to be enjoyed without food. Even if you are meeting friends in a bar, there will always be some sort of aperitivo offered, often quite, extensive. So wine is something that's very much enjoyed at the table rather than as a drink outside, I would say, as a general rule. It's so utterly linked to food. It's almost impossible to separate.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. And those lovely bars with all those snacks lined up on the top. Just go in there and, just order one or two. I love that.
Yeah, that's right. We think of Spain with its wonderful tradition of tapas, as great for that sort of grazing and drinking, but Italy really has that as well, and much more so I found in the recent years than certainly going back to the more distant past when we were traveling around Italy, 20 years ago. That's become a much more common and generous feature along those bar tops. So it's something I really love. But there are some just absolutely classic food and wine combinations that just work. I think we were considering some of these, like the Adriatic Brodetto, this wonderful festival from the sea, this fish soup made often with the blue fish, the oily fish, quite different from fish soupy stews from elsewhere.
Never had that. So, when you mentioned that, I'd like to think, oh, I'd love to try that.
Oh, yes, it really is a real treat. In Ancona, of course, every town will have its own variation. And the white wines from Le Marche do go so well with it, particularly the more structured Verdicchio wines from Castelli di Esi, but also from Metallica.
Now, I really love Verdicchio. I think it's those Italian white wines that kind of, if you taste them on their own, they're just not much. I mean, Pinot Grigio included, but, Verdicchio Vernaccia, Oviedo, and, they're kind of like really neutral. And then when you have them with food, they burst into life, they're just so perfect.
Yes, I think you're right. They don't have really obvious and pronounced aromatic qualities often, which is sometimes what we're looking for. We're trying to identify scents and flavors. But as you say, when you then enjoy them with the local foods or with any food, Verdicchio, I think, is just such a great food wine. It is one of my favorite Italian wines. One of the interesting things, though, is of course how Italy has so many native grape varieties that one is still discovering. Last night, for example, Kim and I opened a bottle of a wine made from a grape I'd never encountered before, never heard of, Cococciola. Have you come across that?
No.
From Abruzzo. It was relatively light, I think about 12% in alcohol, but very zesty, very citrus, grapefruit, really not highly aromatic, but it was just a beautiful, light, zesty wine to enjoy with some local scallops that we had that I just quickly seared. I don't know where I picked it up. I think probably because I hadn't heard of it before. And that's what I always do suggest to people, that if you're looking at an Italian wine list or an Italian wine in a shop, to choose something you've never heard of before, because it can often be so surprising.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's good wine list advice generally, because that is the way to learn about wine. You get the opportunity to try something you don't know, often by the glass, and the restaurant will have put it on because, the owner or the sommelier is really excited about this wine. And even though they think nobody will know it or recognize it, they like it so much and they don't overprice it. It's always a good buy.
Yes, I think that's right. And as you say, you've got to trust the sommelier, trust the wine buyer, because if it is an unknown name, it's not going to be easy to sell.
Yeah.
And so they must have chosen it because there's something to that wine. There's so many of these wonderful food and wine combinations that you just think of as absolutely classic. I mean, one of the most obvious would be the famous bistecca alla Fiorentina. Why does that go so well with the local wines of Tuscany?
I think because it often has a squeeze of lemon, doesn't it? Or maybe always has a squeeze of lemon. And I mean, red meat and red wine is a bit of a no-brainer. It generally works, but there's something about that cut and the way it's served with the lemon on the side and the fact that the acidity in Sangiovese that makes it just sing, doesn't it? It's a brilliant combination.
I think you're right. I think it's that acidity that the best wines from Chianti Classico, Brunello, Vino Nobile di Montepulciano has underlying a structure which is never overly heavy. But as you say, there's so many red wines. I'm sure you have written extensively about the best wines with steak, and there would be many arguments for this or that. But certainly with the bistecca, I think it's one of the great combinations. We also, we think about Italian food as if it was a single cuisine. But of course, there's so many different cuisines across this lengthy country thinking of the Northeast, Friuli, Venezia Giulia, for example, where we have influences of Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, Venice, all overlaid in the foods with completely different food profiles than, say, in the deep South or indeed in Sicily. So it's hard to really, generalize about Italian food, but that's why it's so fascinating as well.
And I think, it's worth remembering sparkling wine too in terms of Italy. I mean, Prosecco is so ubiquitous now, and kind of like we all tend to be, a bit sniffy about it, I think, in the wine trade. But, in a nice day, in Venice, little restaurant, canal-side restaurant, cafe, plate of Frito Misto and a bottle of Prosecco. That's just a great combination, isn't it?
It is. You're absolutely right. And there's so many good sparkling wines now being made everywhere in the country. I think wine technology is allowing, great sparkling wines to be made from the north of Italy right down to Sicily, where I've had some interesting sparkling wines from Caricante grapes grown on Etna.
Oh, I love Caricante. That's a lovely grape variety, isn't it, to look out for? I mean, it's great with the seafood on Sicily.
Oh, it is. And it's also one of those white wines that has, and few in Italy, that has a tremendous capacity to evolve with age in a way that, say, a Riesling can. So it's a stunning grape. I hope we'll see more of it. What are some of your other Italian grape varieties that are both personal favorites and also which you think are particularly great with food?
Oh my goodness, it's such a big question. I love Vermentino. I've only once been to Sardinia, but fell in love with it, and also the Vermentinos there. And I love them with seafood again. I really like that. I love Nero d'Avola. I think that's a great red wine variety, and it's brilliant with aubergines, those sort of aubergine parmigiana.
Or the pasta alla norma, this famous dish of Catania.
So I like that. I was thinking, A to Z. I always love Zibibo because it's just such a brilliant name, isn't it, for a grape?
It is. It's such a fabulous name.
And it makes really charming wines, sort of rather kind of light and aromatic and romantic. And I think great actually for those sort of nibbles we were talking about, just kind of you're sitting and snacking and having, preferably by the sea again.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And, let's just think about I'm sure a question you've covered before. It's interesting I was listening to your podcast about wines with curry and how you actually reach conclusions of wines that work well when you're actually tasting foods and wines together. What about pizza? Pizza must be a subject you've covered. I was interested to watch a podcast that Stevie Kim did actually on her YouTube channels, and it is on Italian Wine Podcast, on pizza in Naples. And in one of the famous pizza places, I can't remember which one, they said that the traditional wine to drink with pizza in Naples is Marsala.
Really?
Yeah, Marsala. But nowadays people were going for bubbles, bollicine, sparkling wines, but the old way, the old school wine in Naples was Marsala. What do you think about pizza and wine?
Well, I suspect, and you'll put me right on this if I'm wrong, that actually most Italians will go for beer with a pizza. You quite often go to pizza places in Italy and you see young Italians, with something like a Peroni. I just think anything light and drinkable and gulpable. I mean, I probably myself would go for a light red. But if you've got a seafood pizza of some kind, an easy drinking wine, but not strong in personality, gulpable, what the French call a vin de soif.
Yes. I guess that's why a wine like a simple Montepulciano d'Abruzzo is often popular in such places, not the more serious heavyweights, but the simpler examples.
And I think also there's there's quite a sort of strong natural wine movement now coming through in Italy, isn't there? And
oh yes, there is.
So a lot of those, very light, unfiltered reds are absolutely delicious with pizza.
Yes, definitely. Now, just a final question on cooking with wine. A lot of Italy's famous dishes have wine in the cooking pot. I'm thinking of brasato al barolo, for example, or risotto all'amarone, or stracotto al Chianti. Wines where the wine is important ingredient as anything else in the dish. What do you think about cooking with prestigious and expensive wines? Is it worth it?
It depends how long the wine is going to be in the dish, in my view. So if it's a long braise, then there really is no point in putting a very expensive wine in, because actually it just all kind of breaks down. As you know, the only thing I would always do with the end of that cooking process is add a dash of better wine, probably the wine you're going to drink, just to kind of lift the flavors, and it just brings the wininess of it back. But if you're making something very simple, some chicken with a white wine sauce and mushrooms or something like that, it's worth using a slightly better wine, and maybe the wine you're going to drink, because actually you drink, if you make it with a really good Chardonnay, for example, you do get the benefit of that. But it's all a question of how long is that wine going to be cooked for? Short time, up the quality, longer, something clean and drinkable, but I don't think it has to be special myself.
Yes, I think I'd agree with you. I mean, the times I've enjoyed something like brasato al Barolo, I've been in the home of a Barolo producer, and it was quite easy to go down in the cellar and pull out a jug of wine from the vat to bring it up to put in the cooking pot. Not so easy for most of us when, it's such a costly wine that has been aged for upwards of years. To do that, it's quite difficult to open the cork and begin pouring it into the pot.
No, I think so, but it depends how many of you there are two. There are two of you, and you're making, a quick saute of something, and you're drinking a rather special wine with it. Go for it. Put half a glass or a glass into the dish.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, we've covered a lot of ground this morning, Fee, but we've only just touched the surface of a really vast and fun subject. And I think that's what I like about your approach to matching food and wine. There are no dogmatic rules that you make or, strictures on what can and what you shouldn't do or what you should do. But really, I think what you give is people the playfulness, the confidence to explore, to taste, to have fun with wine. And in that sense, matching food and wine is really about enhancing the enjoyment of both the wine and the food, and indeed the whole social experience. So that's what I hope people will take from this podcast, the confidence to really play and have fun.
Yes, definitely. I still find it sad that a lot of people still feel intimidated by wine, that it's a subject they feel they ought to know more about. And it should just be something to enjoy and experiment with. You're not going to know everything. We don't know everything. And so, just keep trying things. As you said, you were, a different wine last night. Just constantly take the opportunity to try, and try with food, preferably.
Yes, enjoying with food. And I think that's the Italian lesson as well, that food and wine are part of life, and they're to be enjoyed together. And together they make our lives better, more enjoyable. So with that, Fee, I think we'll close our podcast. It's been a real pleasure meeting up with you again today here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fee. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Vinitaly International Wine and Spirits Exhibition, the biggest drinks trade fair in the world. For more information about Vinitaly and tickets, visit vinitaly.com, and remember to subscribe to Italian Wine Podcast and catch us on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your pods. You can also find us at italianwinepodcast.com.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.